Good evening. I'm Joshua Simons, Executive Director of the Percussive Art Society. I want to thank you and the members of our roundtable for joining us tonight for what is an extremely important conversation. I want you to know that tonight is not the beginning, but a continuation of the work that the Percussive Art Society's Diversity Alliance, staff, and board leadership have been working on for more than 4 years now. We gather tonight because as members of the Percussive Art Society, we have the ability and duty to bring these conversations to light and to begin to make real change. Tonight's roundtable will not be taking questions from the comments section, as we want to make sure that each member of our roundtable has enough time to speak. But we do encourage you to use the comments section however you see fit. It is now my pleasure to introduce Teddy Hall Jr., our point person on the Diversity Alliance for African American Diversity and a key driving force for helping make tonight's roundtable possible. Teddy?
Thank you, Joshua Simons, for your kind remarks. We have some powerful and prolific speakers on tonight. I ask you to prepare your hearts and minds to listen closely to our conversation. Our special guests include Dr. Jillian Baxter, Assistant Professor of Percussion at Albany State University, Professor Ricky Burkhead, Director of Percussion Studies at the University of Mississippi, Miss Terri Lyne Carrington, Grammy Award-winning drummer, the founder and artistic director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. We have Miss Latrice Green, band director and percussion specialist at Jefferson County Schools. We have Mr. Josh Jones, principal percussionist of the Kansas City Symphony. We have Dr. Lamon Lawhorn, assistant director of bands at North Carolina A&T State University. We have Dr. Joe W. Moore III, composer and assistant professor of percussion at Benedict College. Last but not least, we have Miss Alana Wiesing, principal timpanist of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra. Our focus question for tonight is, what can be done in the drum and percussion community to help with overcoming racial barriers that exist in the education and performance world? Guests, you may now begin our conversation.
I guess for me, that question is an interesting one because I never really look at that question as a singular issue. For me, I'm constantly, as a Black woman, dealing with race and gender. So it's impossible for me to separate those issues. You know, some days one hits me a little harder than the other. It really depends on what's happening around me. But I find the question interesting too, because I don't know who we're talking to. If we say, what can the community do? Are we talking about ourselves? Are we talking about, people that, and even language is getting strange for me because I don't like to use the word privileged anymore. I don't like to use allies. I don't like to use supremacy and these things because I feel that I'm giving energy to those areas by using those terms. But for lack of a better word at the moment, people that are considered privileged in this country, I think the question now is what can they do? Because that's what we're seeing. And that's why, this movement is so powerful right now because, the people that are not in the oppressed community are asking, what they can do. So I think that's extremely powerful, as far as what we can do more from the underrepresented community. I think that's individual. I'm doing what I can do. I have been for a few years now. I must say I was pretty happy-go-lucky, not really doing a whole lot in those areas before, but just dealing with practicing, at a younger age, getting a career to a certain, drive for a career, and that takes a lot of time. So I really didn't have the space to do any social activist work. But as I got older, I made the space. I found the space for it, and it's like a Pandora's box. Once you start down that road, there's really no turning back. So I think it's up to everybody to figure out, you have to excuse me, my dog is trying to break down the door to get in this room. But, I think everybody has to decide what they can do, basically. And, you know, be earnest and authentic with that. And that's everybody. I mean, you know, we obviously have been talking a lot these days about implicit bias. You know, there's also inherent, you know, bias. And I always also look to the community themselves to look inward and see what, you know, what have we done also by, you know, in benefiting, you know, have we, I think it's a question, a reasonable question, you know, to ask ourselves, have we benefited from exceptionalism or, you know, benefited in any way from a racist or a sexist culture? And those are hard questions, if we know, because we live in a capitalist society. So I think we're all, you know, benefiting in some way, not all, but, you know, a lot of people. So anyway, those are some of my initial thoughts. And I'd love to hear everybody else's. I do want to say before I forget to Dr. Baxter that my dad went to Albany State, so I would be remiss not to mention that. And he would, if he watches this, he would really give me a hard time if I didn't say something about that. So.
Thank you, Ms. Carrington. Just to, for a point of reference, just to circle back to something you said, to clarify with this question, and really appreciate your comments. I think we want to just say for the drum and percussion community as a whole, the percussion companies, the drum companies, the colleges, anything percussion related in education or the community or even the music industry, what can be done to help break down these barriers? And you started our minds to thinking with those powerful comments. And I'm just going to continue to roll, you know, with anybody else that wants to jump right in on this piece.
I'd like to jump right in on this piece. So one of the biggest things I think that we actually have to understand is recognizing who the actual experts are and giving them credit for it. We have it so locked down in our minds that you need a formal education to be an expert at something. And that's especially true in drum and percussion, because of course we'll go and claim, you know, it's really, really authentic if you go to Brazil and learn samba. It's really authentic if you go to South Asia to learn those types of indigenous instruments, but then we shove it all through like a university program and say that the only way you really can truly learn it though is if you have that piece of paper from the university, even though there are people in the world that this is their life. They live that every day. It is authentic to them, but a lot of what we've done is gentrified it through the university systems. Another thing that I was thinking about is just, sorry, I kind of went blank a little bit there, but that was kind of my biggest thing. Just really giving those people the credit that they deserve and understanding that they are experts and that we, for PAS, a lot of the stuff we do is really geared toward university people, is geared toward academia. And that's our audience, but it's such a small percentage of our audience. Our audience is garage drummers, and our audience is middle schoolers, and our audience is Black boys that play at church on Sundays that have never read a note in their lives. So that's our audience, and we need to include them in that and recognize that those are absolutely valid ways to pursue percussion education. Excuse the cat. Sorry, that's what I have to say on that.
I'll reply to that, you know, because PAS is so academic driven that, and I'll speak directly to percussion teachers, percussion professors, is to give students of color an opportunity. I myself, a graduate of Prairie View A&M University, I applied to 5 graduate schools and I auditioned at 4, and I got into 1. And that one school that I got into was the professor that's on this call or Zoom meeting right now is Mr. Burkhead. And after having that audition, we kind of talked like some time later, and he was like, you're kind of like a diamond in the rough, you know, like you got it. You just need to get a bit more refining. And one of the schools that I auditioned at, I'm not gonna name the school, but the initial master's audition lasted 15 minutes. It was like literally embarrassing, like just wasn't it. And after studying with Mr. Burkhead, I went back and auditioned at that same school. And the audition lasted an hour and a half. And they said, we remember you when you came for the master's program. You weren't prepared, you just wasn't ready. But listening to you play now, we can tell, like, we need students like you. It's not that you couldn't play, it's just that you didn't know and that you didn't have the information. And to know that I had the abilities, I just needed to get somewhere or get under someone who could show me. And it wasn't that I was illiterate. It wasn't that I was a low-level player or anything like that. It's just I needed to get that information. And I think oftentimes we overlook, or oftentimes people overlook people of color because they come from a background where they play drums at their church. I grew up playing drums in my church. And they may not be the best readers, but they are the best workers. Meaning they'll spend hours and hours practicing to get whatever it is that they have to get. They just need the opportunity. It just makes no sense why you would necessarily overlook a certain person because they may be lacking in this one thing, but they may be lacking it or something else. But in the end, that person is going to graduate and be a great representative of the institution that you come from. Because they can say whenever the next time they, you know, speak to someone or they graduate or they go to some other conference and they put their credentials, it's going to say that they studied with you. And that way, when they speak to another person of color, they can say, well, hey, you may want to go to this school, or you may want to give their information, or they may end up teaching at another university. And now their credentials or their teaching, they're giving that same teaching to somebody else. And now that person of color, the person coming under them, is now more prepared when they go out and do the same things. So my whole thing is just to give the students an opportunity. PAS, one thing you can do is give people of color an opportunity and understand that the things that are going on is not just racial, it's also economical. You know, when we talk about systemic racism, it's also economics, because I was just working with a new band director here today and looking at their instruments, and I was like, man, there's no, like, this band director just got a new job doing inventory on his instruments, and things are in like shambles. And I'm just thinking, like, if these students aren't going to be able to take private lessons, these students aren't going to be able to do summer camps or go to attend workshops and things over the summer. So of course, you know, they're going to be different students who have opportunities who are above them. Like, I know DCI is not happening, but these students aren't going to be able to pay $4,000 over the summer to attend these camps. So I think if there's any opportunities to maybe create scholarships for your summer camps, I know PAS has already created scholarships for PASIC, but if you have the opportunity to understand, and it's not, you know, I'm not asking for a handout, but I'm also asking you to understand that there may be a situation where a student just simply can't attend for financial reasons, and that you understand that, hey, this is still a good student, maybe I can assist. And then when that student goes and gets that job or do something, maybe they can come back and help and assist or do whatever it is. So just creating opportunities for those students of color, because they are still good students. And who knows, they could end up being the Dr. Lawhorn or Dr. Baxter or Dr. Moore one day. Just give them the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'd love to piggyback on that, actually.
Sure.
So I am a huge advocate of early education, and similar to other comments that have been said earlier in this discussion already, if we start to try and address the conversation at the professional or the collegiate level, which there's still plenty of work to be done across all levels for sure. But if that's our priority, it's almost already too late, because similar to comments that have been made earlier, these kids don't have access to equipment, or they don't have the financial means to be able to afford weekly private lessons or afford to participate in a youth orchestra program or other community music program. And so I am a strong believer in increasing the accessibility and opportunity and inclusion at levels of early education. That way, these kids can have that opportunity to advance and have that exposure so that when they get to a place in their senior year of high school where they're starting to consider if music can be a sustainable and possible career for them, that they'll be able to successfully audition into programs and not have to worry about these other systemic barriers that exist for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just, sorry, Jillian.
You're all good, it's Dr. Moore.
I would just say this, just piggybacking off of what's been said here, this was actually the thing I had written down, was to support those music programs, those outreach programs for young musicians specifically that we're talking about. Support them by giving time, by donating, whether it's instruments or any sort of financial support, because like everyone is saying, if we can start at that early age, once they're getting up into the collegiate level and audition for things, they're ready to go because they have been prepared from that early age up to that point. So, and we all know those organizations that exist in our communities. And we know what those are, so we should really take the time out, support, do what we can, even if we're free. I think important to make sure that we are inspiring the young musicians, young percussionists of color to be able to achieve the types of things that we all are sitting here doing right now. So piggybacking off of that, sorry, my internet keeps going in and out. But just piggybacking off of that, and I think that's the first step. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhead, because I'm also an alum of the University of Mississippi, and I have to give credit where credit is due, as Dr. Lamon, Dr. Lawhorn did. Professor Burkhead, can you give your thoughts on this question?
Yes, and this is good timing for me. Like I said, I'm in my car and I'm in a storm. It's raining so hard here.
Oh,
it's
man.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'd like to address that question as it pertains to PAS. My first PASIC convention was in 1979, and it was in New York City. I'm from the South in Mississippi, and I went to a historically black college like Lamon did, Mississippi Valley State University. So I was accustomed to that world. Going to New York City opened up a whole other world to me. And in that convention, I saw Max Roach, I saw Freddie Waits, I saw Double Image, Rob Carson, who invited me to his room to do some snare drumming, and I saw Lee Stevens' Town Hall concert where he premiered some great works. And so that was eye-opening. I also met Johnny Lane, who was my graduate school teacher and went on to be my mentor. His student, Jeff Pelleton, was my teacher at Mississippi Valley State, who took me to that convention. So I've been in PAS since '79. I participated all these years, and when it came time to start teaching, which I started in 1985, you start working on your dossier and you start building your career, and you attend conventions, and now it means something, not just to go, but to participate and present at these conventions. And so over the years, the companies were good to me because I became an endorser for Zildjian, Vic Firth, Majestic, LP, and Remo. That worked out great. When it came to apply to be a presenter for a fundamental session or a clinic, I did that for years. And I thought I had a good proposal that went up on different topics over the years that at least one could have made it. I had people who were insiders of PAS who said the same thing. I served on the ensemble committee for several years, and when some of the people on that committee and other committees looked at it, they thought I had a good chance to present at PAS, but that never happened. I've made all my ranks as a professor. I'm full professor now. The one thing I needed when I applied to be full professor is to make sure I had a presentation at a conference that was juried at my major organization that I'm a member of. That never happened. And I've never played the race card, and I'm at a university that in 1962 was the first time they let a black man in, and President Kennedy had to send the National Guard just to let Jane Meredith go to school there. Then they bombed his dorms, they did all kinds of things. I'm the first black in my department. I made full professor, but it wasn't all that easy. And I never cried the race card. Once when I had a talk with my department chair, and each year he was writing on my evaluation, you got to have that presentation at a national conference. I say, well, I wish I could, but I've sent proposals several times and been turned down. And I say, I think that the system is somehow looking at me, and there seems to be a racial bias there that won't let me in. Now, I know a lot of people get turned down, but if I had other people who testified to the same fact that my proposal seemed like they should have made it, then that was a problem. So I started using the Historically Black Colleges and University National Band Directors Consortium as one of the places that I was doing clinics. So I put that down as a major organization, and I had to prove to my department chair that was a major organization, and that proposal and the clinics that I did were things that I could get credit for to become a full professor. So in addressing that question, I just think that PAS should look into not being biased when it comes down to proposals like that and really think about them. I attended some of those clinics of people who made it on the years that I didn't, and my stuff was just as powerful and good.
Thank you, Professor Burkhead, for sharing your comments and your story, and know that it did not fall on deaf ears. Dr. Baxter, can you speak to the effect of your story as an African-American woman coming up in academia and the experiences that you have had and what you would like to see done to overcome racial barriers?
Most definitely. As a woman, African-American woman, it's been a very unique journey, or maybe not even unique. I think the more women I find that look like me, I actually find that they have a very similar story. But unfortunately, we are so divided, meaning I don't see them. I don't know that they exist. And one of the big things that kind of keeps coming up is this idea of visibility and opportunity. I was born into an area that was kind of mixed as far as being not predominantly Black, not predominantly white. You know, I attended predominantly white institutions. But in all of those areas, I just grew up being accustomed to the only person who looked like me. I think the older I got, the less, when I looked around the classroom, it was just me. And, you know, you kind of have to build a tough exterior skin to be able to survive when you don't have somebody else to relate to. Not that people are not people, but there's just something different when you have somebody that can come from a similar background or has similar experiences. You know, when you meet them, you just have an immediate link to them. So my journey, you know, has been one kind of an uphill battle. You know, I've always had to kind of fight to fit in different places. I've always felt that I've had to work 10 times as hard just to be at the table. And, you know, luckily for me, I have been strong enough to endure. The unfortunate part is that a lot of people are not strong enough to fight like that. And, you know, I've been able to teach middle school, high school, and finally college. And in those experiences, the thing that's really neat, I think, when I've come to a classroom is that if I see someone who looks like me, they are excited to see me because they're like, wow, they feel that link and they feel that love. And so one of the important things I think when we're talking about racial barriers is just the visibility. So many people lose hope. They have the ability, as somebody has already said, they have the ability to do it. They'll want to work hard, but when they don't see somebody else who has done it or is capable of doing it, they kind of say, well, why try? they're not, everybody else, I can't do it. It's just so many things that will psychologically hold you down. So I think as a culture, as a world, we need to have more visibility in all aspects. We need to have visibilities, whether we're talking about universities, if we're talking about secondary, middle schools, across the board. I would even say in big industry. We were talking about performance, and I think that question was performance and education. But I think even in industry as a whole, I'm sure that, not everybody's going to be a major performer. Not everybody's going to be a teacher. One of the big things now is people are interested in music industry, music business. So they want to play, but they're interested in the marketing side, the engineering, all of these things. But if I go to a major company, there are not that many people of color that you see out in the forefront. Okay, so we need to have more visibility for those people. I know that there are a number of companies that have internships available, but sometimes you have to go and search for those opportunities. Rarely, as far as my university, rarely do I have a flyer, a letter, email, anything come to me saying, here's this opportunity at this company for students to come. It's more if you're in that particular area. Because I went to Middle Tennessee State, I was in Nashville, so I was close to Pearl. I would know about, there are internships at Pearl. But if I were somewhere else, I wouldn't know that. So I think that as far as companies in industry, there needs to be more of a push to reach out to a diverse people as a whole. Reach out to HBCUs, reach out to underrepresented societies, things like that. You have to go out and look for these people. Right. Want That's something right. to happen. Once I feel like I am by myself, I'm not going to be active to jump out and say, "Hey, look at me, help me." We have to go out and find these people and give them hope by being seen by what we're doing. So, that's coming from me and just having to work harder than I probably should have, and still feeling like I still am working pretty hard, and I'm not complaining at all. It's made me who I am, but I want to make sure that somebody after me does not have to go through the struggle that I've had to go through. It should not be this hard simply because of the color of your skin and because of your gender. It should be, if we're going to say that we want equal opportunity, equity, all of these things, then we've got to do something. So I just put it out there that we just got to be more visible. Companies need to seek for people of color to fill positions, to be in the forefront, to have sponsorships, to give clinics and presentations. We have to be out there, and it's not a handout. As it's already been said, we are qualified. We know what we're doing, and we are gifted. Give us the opportunity, and it will change the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baxter. Mr. Jones, could you speak to the effect of the financial aspect in classical music and auditioning for orchestras, as well as the Sphinx organization and how your relationship with them, as well as other colleagues, has been a great asset in the African American community? Well, Ms. Wiesing, we're going to come back to Mr. Jones. Could you give us some comments on that? We're going to come back to Mr. Jones in just a second.
Absolutely. There have been some significant improvements made over the years as it pertains to orchestra auditions, such as the inclusion of the screen at most, if not all, rounds of auditions. And I definitely think that that's a helpful step. But I don't think that it's quite enough. I think that, piggybacking off of what I was saying earlier, there needs to be a significant amount of work done in earlier stages of education so that there will be students and aspiring professionals taking these auditions in greater numbers, because by the time they get to the collegiate level and they are at the point where they're ready to be taking professional auditions, it's almost too late, because they might not have necessarily had access to those opportunities to be able to be on an orchestral track to audition for these jobs. And piggybacking off of some other comments earlier, it's definitely been a concern of mine, and I've heard that it's a concern of Josh's as well, that there is that worry when the screen does come down, if we get to a final round of an audition, if there is going to be that inherent bias, and that worry that we have to prepare 2, 3, 4 times as hard just to make sure that the committee can assess without a doubt that it is the playing and the playing alone that is being given that merit, and not to determine a winner based on the color of our skin, or also in my case, my gender. And so there is a lot of work that still needs to be done there. I think a lot of that work also has to come down to the individuals, to the people who are in that position of power to help give us opportunities and to help us win these jobs, because a single job can change someone's life. And I know that it's seriously changed my life for the better and allowed me to have a platform to be able to speak on these kinds of issues more effectively and have that reputation that people will actually value what I have to say on these issues. And I'm forever grateful for that. And so I think if we can get to a place where we can include more people, have that access and that opportunity available to all people, particularly these marginalized groups and people of color and underprivileged communities that can really benefit from these resources and these opportunities because they don't necessarily know about them. And so I think there's been great work done on the audition front, but we absolutely cannot stop here. I think there are still so many strides that need to be made in order to get us to a place where we really are viewed as equal, as just as qualified, just as good, and not have to worry about the color of our skin, and also in my case, my gender, as barriers into working in this industry.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wiesing. Mr. Jones, we give you the opportunity now to share your comments.
I would say it's so interesting because my life has been so almost so narrow in this field, to the point where I started taking lessons again just because we had access to lessons that were free from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra Percussion Scholarship Program. And I started that when I was in 4th grade. And at that point, I had no idea what, I didn't know you could be an orchestra. I just was like, oh, I'm gonna go learn how to play more drums or something like that. And it wasn't until I was told that this was a possibility by my teachers that we really started working towards that goal when I was in high school. And I know for a fact I would not have gotten as far as I did, as quickly as I did, had I not been in that program. It just wouldn't have happened. I would have just been playing in church for the rest of my life, probably. I wouldn't have thought anything about orchestra playing or teaching. Like, I just would have been playing in church. And to that point, I even started sharing more information. Even when I was a kid, I would teach the younger students. When I was a 2nd year, I would go from school to school and ask, hey, do you have a program of music? Do you need someone to tutor your drum musicians? I play with this group over here. Like, I did that when I was young, and I kept it going through high school and college, and just would go to random schools and be like, hey, you want to learn how to play drums? And you want someone to do a master class for you for free? Like, I would just do it for free because I knew that they didn't have access to that. Like, CSO isn't going to every school, to do this kind of stuff, but I have this free time. So not saying that we should all like go out and do that all the time. It's like every once in a while, just volunteer your time and and or just share information. I used to print out flyers about the percussion scholarship program and send it off to different schools and do that type of work. But then to the point of auditioning, like even my teachers when I was in high school said that this would be a problem for me. Patricia Dash had issues with her progression in school and in auditions, and her being the first female percussionist in the Chicago Symphony, she faced a lot of issues, and she tried to relate to my hopefully not future experience, but she kind of figured it would be my future experience of having similar issues, just having to deal with the color of my skin. And we talked a lot about that through high school and college. And she did her best to try to teach me or prepare me for those issues. But of course, she's not Black. And we didn't really know another Black musician that we could directly get in contact with. Who knows what I would have done had I had that experience, but you know, she did her best. You know, we do the best we can with what we have. But yeah, it's again the point of me worrying that, am I good enough to stand? Am I good enough so that my skin won't talk for me? Like it's that kind of thing. My father and my grandfather told me about that too, where we had to practice twice as hard to, you know, be seen as equal. So I figured I'll just practice 4 times as hard. That way it won't even be a question. And luckily in the last auditions I've taken, one with the screen down so they saw who I was, and one with the screen up, I was successful with doing that. And with visibility, I want to make sure that people see me. That's why I'm always on Instagram doing all the live streams and things, so that people know that not only do we exist, but we are thriving in this business. And it's not just a lucky break, like we work hard. I've had several people sometimes say I get into things just because I'm Black, like to meet the status quo, meet some quota or something like that. I'm like, well, have you seen me play that?
Right.
Like, you know, our work should speak for itself, not have to fight against our skin color. So that's something I'm always big on.
Wow.
Can I jump in real quick? Like, I've been trying to write down stuff, but when he said the thing about, am I good enough? I'll never forget a conversation. When I first got to UNCG, my professor was Christopher Keaton. And I remember sitting in the lesson and I asked him, like, literally, like, am I good enough? Like, should I be here? Like, am I playing on the level of a doctoral student? And he stopped everything and he said, I'll be honest with you. He's like, you may not know the most marimba literature. You may not know the most excerpts. You may not know the most, you know, timpani excerpt. You may not know the most everything. But I don't know anybody that can play drum set like you and then play marimba, timpani, and everything else at that level like you. Like, I don't know anybody that can play drum set as good as you and then transition and play everything else just as good on that level. So don't ever let me hear you say that. You belong here. And I think that gave me the confidence to just be like, y'all can't tell me nothing because I'm supposed to be here. Like, I'm good enough. And it was players in that studio who were really, really good. Like, we had students from Eastman. We had some students from Belmont that studied with like Chester Thompson. Like, it was our studio was really strong. And for him to say like, you belong here, that did wonders for my confidence because it took away that veil or you know, fear of it took away that doubt that maybe I just got here because I was, you know, Black. Because there were 5 students that auditioned for the DMA program and 1 got in, and that was me. And so I was always on pins and needles, like, should I really be here? Because maybe it was because I was a Black dude. And so, but because that reassurance to know that I'm supposed to be here, not because of the color of my skin, but because of the talent that I have, that does wonders. And I can guarantee you that there are students in studios or students who are playing in bands that are wondering, looking around, that they're the only one there, like, am I really good enough? So I think sometimes, not sometimes, it is great, or I encourage the teachers and professors to encourage your students, because there are many of them that are walking around with that self-doubt, and they're looking over their shoulders wondering, am I supposed to be here? And it will do your students wonders just to give them just a little ounce of encouragement and let them know, hey, it's okay. You are doing just fine. And let them know that everything is A-okay, that they belong there.
Thank you, Dr. Lawhorn, for sharing that. Dr. Moore, we've had conversations, you and I and my other friend, Dr. Greg Jackson, about wondering sometimes, are we doing enough to audition for jobs that are not HBCU percussion faculty teaching positions? And are we writing enough? Are we performing enough? And as Professor Burkhead has said, you wonder, well, what else do I have to do? Could you speak to those experiences? Because I know we've worked on several projects and we've talked a lot about our experiences on that.
Yeah, well, it's essentially similar to what Josh and Lamon were saying, and Alana as well, is you find yourself trying to work even harder than your counterparts just to show that you belong and that you're contributing to this the percussion world. So it's for me, it's some of that where I find my trying to write more composition, and you know, and I've been fortunate to have a very successful career as a percussionist to this point, and I hope that what I am doing, and like many of you, will inspire the next generation to come up and to achieve the things that we've been able to achieve. But I would also say just, yeah, I mean, we look around and we wonder if we're doing enough. And I think that's a really hard thing to deal with sometimes when you're being passed up for certain things, when you feel like you've kind of made yourself stand out in a certain way. But at the same time, you know, you try to keep a level head about it, and you try to push through that. And I'm fortunate that I was raised with a very strong background. My parents, they teach me to keep pushing, keep driving for things, but not everybody has a support system. So I think we can all be better about supporting each other and supporting others who we see that are striving to be the very best they can be.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. I definitely agree with that. Ms. Carrington, I have been a big fan of yours since I was in high school. When you first played on the Arsenio Hall show years ago, I went out and bought your first project on cassette tape, Real Life Story, and I followed you from there. It just blessed me to come to Hampton University when I was teaching there, and you inspired so many students, particularly a student at the time that I had, Miss Kia Stallings. We'd stay in touch on Facebook. But I invited you because I wanted you to empower women percussionists and drum set players. And I've been a fan particularly of the Jazz as a Spirit and the Mosaic Project. And I wanted to ask if you would speak to the work that you're doing at the Institute there at Berklee, as well as the advice that you would give to women musicians of color to how to break racial barriers, and even in your own experiences, what you would think would be some good solutions and some wisdom.
Well, I wish I had the solutions. That would be great. I also, want to say that I feel that all of you that are involved with orchestral music, classical music, you chose a path that is, very, very different than mine, and possibly, not possibly, I feel that it's probably more difficult through breaking through, the systemic racism that is in your field, your arena. So we're talking about, on this call, education and performance, and the PAS has put this together. And I was trying to think back to the last PAS conference that I went to. I can't really remember when that was. And I feel like, sometimes there are these lines, imaginary lines in the sand, I don't know, drawn between these genres. And I was having a discussion with somebody else yesterday about, how what we consider greatness, if we're just dealing with drums and percussion, and how well somebody plays, what is that determined by? And I think we have to kind of go back and look at that some more when we're talking about racial equity or racial justice in this field, because somebody, I'm not going to just speak about the drums, but in music in general, somebody can really, read impeccably, hit every note exactly right, flawless, never make a mistake, but they can't play the blues. Somebody can, play bebop or the blues, but still have trouble reading. And I just feel like we have to start looking at those things a little more, and looking at all of our strengths, because I think, there's sometimes, biases, within our communities, because I know that some top orchestral players may think, this, like, I'm trying to get away from thinking about it in a hierarchical way, because I'm always shocked when I go to a performing arts school and they're only teaching orchestral music or classical music, or
that's right.
And I feel like, all the contemporary music, all of the roots music of this country has been based on African American experience, and somehow often that feels like it's left out of conversations when people start talking about what's legitimate or what's not. And for me, improvising, creative music, improvising, there's obviously master percussionists that can't read a note, they're, from Africa, Cuba, all of these places. And I just feel like, maybe, these organizations should dig a little deeper into what percussive arts are, in general, and really, make sure there's equity there, because I feel like I'm the only person in my field on this call, as far as a jazz artist, at least one that's, done as much as I've done. And so I just, wanted to say that, throw that out there for the organizers. But as I said, I haven't been to a conference in a long time. As far as, back to your question, that was kind of a sidebar.
No, we're glad you said that, because I'm going to ask something else after you finish. Go ahead.
What we're doing at the Institute is, I can't stress enough. Everybody here has talked about working twice as hard, 4 times as hard. And I can't stress enough how for women, that's twice as much as all of you that aren't, and not just women. I also have to make sure that I talk about people on the entire gender spectrum, because we think too often in the binary, and that's just not acceptable anymore. I saw an amazing master's thesis presentation from our school today on a transgender student that really had everybody in tears, because everybody, literally crying, trying to make comments as the jury, because it made everybody really look at, how they have treated that community. So, we started this institute at Berklee because there's, so many women and people on the gender spectrum, non-male identifying people that just needed a place to feel safe, needed a place to learn without feeling scrutinized at everything they do. I mean, because like I had a trio with Esperanza Spalding and Jerry Allen, two of the greatest on their instruments. And it was interesting because both of them, I hadn't even really thought about it, but both of them felt like finally they could let their hair down. Finally they could play without some kind of protective mechanism around them, with some kind of barrier between, oh, they only think I'm good because I'm a woman. Oh, they're looking at my legs. Oh, I'm not playing as hard or as strong, so they're judging that. All of these things going on, in your brain. It's hard enough just to learn how to play and to have to be thinking about all of that too. And when I thought about it, these are great people that have, been, recognized and heralded as great, and they're still dealing with that. And then if I look at myself, I still feel like I'm proving myself after 3 Grammy Awards, and I've won Musician of the Year, the Jazz Journalist this year, and I still feel like I have to prove myself. There's something very wrong with that.
It is.
And it also creates, to Josh's point, imposter syndrome. It's still there. I mean, I don't think I could do anything and not still feel like have all of that going on in the back of my brain. So that's why I started, this institute in hopes that other young women can, or young people studying jazz specifically, can really, I hope for a future where they don't have to really deal with those things to the degree that I have or my colleagues have. And I'm the first person to say that I can't wait until the day that this institute is no longer needed, or is changes its mission statement, or until these things are not so consuming. So that's why I started. I don't know if you ask me why, but I always start with the why, because that explains it more. And it's really our culture is really shifting and changing, and everybody has to, I think, get on board or get left out.
That's right.
And I mean, there's a whole lot I could say. I don't want to take up for so much time. You said you had a follow-up question?
I did. You always pique my curiosity and interest in jazz studies, and I've often talked to my teacher, Professor Burkhead, and Lamon, and Joe, and Jillian, and various others about the role of drum set in the curriculum at the colleges, because you're right, some people do place a higher value on concert percussion studies over drum set, or feel like if you're, that's not as important. And I want to ask if you could speak to that effect about the importance of drum set, and in particular jazz drum set in the curriculum, because as we know, you can get a gig playing drum set quicker than you will getting calls for something else, whether it be in church or the club or bandstand or something. So I really would like for you to just give us your comments on that.
Well, I think, we all have to have options. I mean, especially young people of color. I think you have to almost be able to do as much as you can and see how things fall out. There's only going to be, a certain amount of jobs if you're trying to be an educator in certain areas. And I think that, you find your area of specialty, but I mean, I always encourage people to try to learn as much as they can at the earliest ages. I mean, I was fortunate to start working, with Jazz Legends when I was 10 and 11 years old. but that didn't prepare me, you know, I mean, because I was doing that, I didn't focus on studying percussion. I've never played percussion. People call me a percussionist and I tell them that's not accurate. I'm a drum set player and that's about it. But, you know, I did study, I should say that totally. I did study vibes. That was actually my major when I went to Berklee, but then I dropped out. So it's also, you know, interesting because in this more contemporary and jazz and contemporary music, there's so many names, I don't know what people call stuff anymore. But in that field, you know, we can get, like I came into a college that I teach at as a full professor. I have 3 honorary the end of this year, I'll have 3 honorary doctorates.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And I only went to college full time for 3 semesters. Wow. You know, but I mean, I'm not saying to somebody, to a young person, that should be your trajectory, because that's just not going to happen to everybody, right? But I do feel like, you know, because of being successful in a certain area, I didn't study these other things as much. So, but, you know, just enough to at least, I'm thinking specifically of a movie date that I did. And because, you know, I had a bit of a name, this was in, I don't know, late 90s. In Los Angeles, I asked for double scale and they interpreted that as me doubling. And I don't double. So they came to a cue that had no drum set. And they said, okay, it's vibraphone or timpani. Well, I couldn't tell you, you know, on a timpani, I don't even know where, you know, I don't know where to begin. And, you know, so first I started sweating, but then that little bit of vibes, you know, knowledge that I had allowed me to play that cue. Thank God it was a ballad, you know, and it was a very slow cue and I was able to do it. But, you know, it really taught me a you know, big lesson as far as, you know, trying to really fully prepare, you know, our students as many ways as you can, whether it's even thinking about Broadway shows and other things that a drum set person can do. And I always tell, you know, even like, you know, in contemporary music, learning enough rock, learning enough funk, learning, you know, the basics of percussion, that's kind of what Berklee specializes in. So a contemporary musician can work. And I always also tell people, you don't want to be, you know, the person that is replaced on their own gig because they couldn't do something. And I'm thinking about a time that I played with Aretha Franklin, one song because she wanted to do an up-tempo swing tune, Cherokee. And she had this huge show in Los Angeles, and her drummer of many, many, many years, he couldn't cut it. So I'm like called last minute to come play this one song. And I mean, I felt, you know, I use that example because I felt bad and I didn't want to be in that position. Right. You know? So anyway, I feel like it's all, we have to look at kind of the holistic, I mean, also just rhythm in general. You know, some people, I mean, everybody here obviously, you know, has great rhythm, but I see so many people that at school that need to study rhythm more, because I think it's becoming almost like lost in, you know, complex rhythms. You know, it's becoming lost and everything is getting, you know, less and less complex. So I think going kind of back to these different areas, you know, of rhythm, whether it's classical, orchestral, African, and, you know, Hungarian, you know, all these challenging things. I think we all need to, you know, teach those areas in a very wide spectrum of those areas for people to really get back to, you know, the incredible beauty in rhythm, in indigenous rhythms, and yeah. Anyway.
Well, thank you, Ms. Carrington. Those are some powerful words. Ms. Green, I want to piggyback off of what Ms. Carrington mentioned in terms of rhythm. Could you speak to the effect of how you're teaching in your classroom, and especially being an African-American band director and percussion specialist, you're pulling double duty. So could you share some experiences that you've had as an African-American woman in your field of music education, as well as your classroom instruction to students, particularly that may, be people of color or come from low-income neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I will say I taught at minor middle school for 2 years. We had about 230 kids in band, and about 6 of them were white, and the rest of them were Black. We had a few Hispanic kids, but that was about the demographic, and I think it's still the same now. And I was talking to Lalo Davila one time, just to say something about rhythm, but I was talking to Lalo Davila one time. I said, well, how do I get kids to do hard things? Because one of my favorite things is making monsters out of middle schoolers. It's a lot of fun just to see them be able to do anything. Middle school is not my ministry anymore, but I really enjoyed that part of percussion. And I was like, well, how do you get them to do hard things? He said, oh, just don't tell them it's hard. And I was like, oh, easy. And so I just started going with that because yes, we do have tone. Yes, we do have, timbre and all the finesse and stuff like that. But they're 6th graders. Put some right, left, right, rights in front of them. You don't even have to know how to read music. I like to do a rudimental ritual that I found on the internet. And as long as the stickings are written in there, they can just do all the diddle rudiments, and just starting them off moving their hands is what's really important there. Because they're not spending, 6 months trying to get a characteristic tone, in their mouthpiece. So they need something to do, otherwise they're going to cut up. But I will say, just to give a little background, I grew up in a small country town, Roanoke, Alabama, population about 6,500. And so I live in Birmingham now, so I don't have a ton in common with the students I was teaching, even though I am Black. And let me back up a little bit. I went to a predominantly white high school because that's what was there. Everybody really fed into like the old South will rise again kind of deal, and people proudly, had rebel flags. Not everybody. It was a few, but that was something that was just okay there, and a lot of people still think it is. And I had no idea, as like a middle schooler per se, how much of an effect that had on my entire life. And I remember, as like a 6th grader getting invited to birthday parties and then getting uninvited to that birthday party because their parents were racist, or their grandparents were Klan members, or, they had family members that were coming through that were not going to be okay with me being there. And I always used to wonder why my grandma never let us really spend the night at other places or have sleepovers or go anywhere. It was always like, well, who is this? Well, what's their mama's name? Well, what did they do? Where did they work? And then I was like, you know what, never mind. I don't even want to go no more. So, but I didn't know she was looking out for me because it's not, I always thought like, why does she think that they're out to get us? That's how I felt. And I resented her a little bit for that. And I now understand that she was right. I mean, she did sit in, she did all of that stuff, and she knew that what the people in Roanoke were like. So, so after that, I just went up through high school, and all the microaggressions were there. Trish, you're not that Black. Trish, you're the whitest Black person I know. Trish, you're an Oreo. You're white on the inside, Black on the inside. If they got a tan, it was my skin is almost as dark as yours. And anybody watching this, I really want you to understand that no Black person wants to hear any of that.
That's right. Just
throwing that out there. They don't. And a lot of people that have been checking on me have been like, Latrice, what can we do? What can I do right now, to try to help? Because it was so bad a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, you can start with your students. One of my students, we were practicing some drumline stuff in the auditorium, and somebody turned the lights off, and then he did the joke of like, where did such and such go? Because they were a Black student. And I was like, absolutely not. We're not doing that here. Your friend may have just laughed at you awkwardly and told you that it was okay, but they're extremely uncomfortable right now, and I am too. And then the kid was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. And then they just moved on. Like, the kids are not going to be upset about it. So we can let them know how we feel. So after leaving Jacksonville, I actually started working at Minor Middle School. This was the first time in my life, other than being at church or at home, that I had been surrounded by other Black people. I was like, look at these babies. They got Afro puffs and they are happy. They got their braids in. It is a good day. But I also didn't belong there at all, because I had spent my whole life surrounded by white people. And that's not a bad thing, but I had spent my whole life censoring myself, code switching, not putting it all out there, because if we're too much, if we're too loud, if we're too ghetto, if we're too this, if we're too that, then we don't make the cut. We constantly have to pare down who we are and what we say and what we do for fear of being viewed a certain way. And when I got to Minor, there were people that just understood. And it was amazing. I had a lot of fun with those kids. And then my second year at Minor, I was in more of a groove. And then I felt like the odd one out, because I was the only woman. We had some movement with some of the directors. And so we had some new people come in. I was still the only woman, but we had two of the guys had gone to HBCUs, and the kids gravitated toward them because all the kids in that population go to HBCUs, and we encourage them to, because we know when they get there, they're not going to be overlooked, and they're not going to be left out, and they're not going to be forgotten. And we push them to that, and they want to be a part of that culture, and they should want that, because why go somewhere where you're going to feel alienated all the time? Right. And when I was leaving, I went back and forth for like months deciding whether I should stay or whether I should go, because I was like, well, our students, our Black kids need really good educators. And I told myself that that's what I was going to be for them. But now I feel like I'm abandoning them, and I feel like I'm not being loyal to Black people. And there are Black people that think that, if you go cater to the white people, or if you leave them, that you hate yourself, and that all this other rhetoric. Those are the demons I was battling. But as far as being a female percussion person, band director, whatever, one of my favorite things that happens all the time still is somebody will come up to me and say, hey, can you tell me where the band director is? And I've gotten to the point where I just say, he's over there. I don't even worry about it anymore. And that happened a lot more at Minor than it did at Pinson. But I don't really run into people as much, or people don't need anything from me or whatever. But I have noticed, like Dr. Baxter said, most of my time going to any type of professional setting, I'm the only Black woman there. And when we see other Black women, we give the nod, because we know. And that's somebody, you see an auntie and you say, hey, auntie, and you go hug her and talk to her, because you know that there's someone there that understands you. And a lot of the time I just get overlooked, and I feel completely alone. And I ask the question, well, where are we? Because there are so many, like she said, that didn't have the strength to keep fighting through the rejections and the overlookings and all this other stuff to get here. And so I wonder, am I supposed to be here? I don't know. And even with PASIC, it's gotten a little bit better at PASIC, but most of the time when I go to PASIC, I'm like the only Black person that's not a performer there, that's not from Trinidad, because they're all coming there for steel band stuff. And that's the truth. And don't get me started with drum corps and music for all and all of this other stuff. And I love NAFME. I think they do a lot for this. I think that organization does a lot for us. But what are we doing about outreach for the NAFME Collegiate Summit? The state of Alabama has more HBCUs than any other state, and they're not represented unless it's some kind of token like, oh, this is our one spotlight that we've got up here. That happens at PASIC a lot.
Right.
Every other year or so, I guess, they'll decide, hey, we need to remind people that we do support HBCUs. And the first time that this committee met, The very first time we had like the, this is what the PAS Diversity Committee meeting is, it was during the, was it Tennessee State or NCAT? I'm not sure. It was during their performance. And they were like, well, what can we do to show the HBCUs that we really support them? And I'm like, well, don't host diversity meetings during their performance. Go to the performance.
Right.
I mean, I was like, that's super simple. But that's kind of been some of my experience. So that kind of representation and it being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of HBCUs are not represented on Capitol Hill, where we're making laws about music education and higher education and all of this other stuff. Because if it were up to them, they would only think that the only school in Alabama is the University of Alabama, because those are the only people who go.
Wow.
And I think it's time that we see a lot more of that. Lessons go a long way. So there are all these layers to all the different things that we've been talking about. It's not just, well, why don't you just take lessons? Well, why don't you just get a better horn? Well, why don't you just do this? And it's like, it's not that simple. And we know it's not that simple. Right. But convincing other people of that is a whole different story. I think that's about all I have to say, unless you have anything else.
No, we've got to wrap up real quickly. Thank you so much for those comments. We want to circle back to Ms. Carrington and ask for your closing comments.
Well, I didn't prepare anything, but I just want to say that it's a pleasure to have been here with all of you and learn something from everybody. And I hope to meet you all in person someday. And I've gone online and listened to as many of you as I can. And, creating this community is a great thing. And, hopefully we can also, if something like this continues, hopefully drummers and percussionists and drummers from other areas can be more included.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carrington. Ms.
Sorry,
Wiesing?
I have to run too.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Wiesing?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say it was an incredible honor and inspiration to be here with all of you today. And this discussion is so incredibly important. Thanks to PAS for organizing this. And I agree, it's important that this is a continuous conversation. This should not be a fixed moment in time where it's an isolated, discussed issue, because we've seen so much throughout the course of history that these tragic incidences happen, and they're discussed and they're in the news for that period of time, and then they're sort of pushed by the wayside again. I really hope that we can take this time and that we can propel it well into the future and have it be a continuous and engaged conversation from here on out, because this is so important and our inclusion and visibility needs to be a priority and a consideration going forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wiesing. Dr. Baxter?
Yes, I just want to say, thank you for having me here to speak tonight. It's been very invigorating being with such a wonderful group of people. I think this communication and conversation, we've just really scratched the surface of so much that we could talk about. And I just hope that for everybody who's watching and everybody here, that we just continue the conversation. Don't be afraid to speak out, because that's the only way that we can fix anything. We've got to start talking about it, and then we've got to do something about it. So just thank you all for letting me be a part of that, and I hope we can all inspire others to move forward in this battle to make things better for all.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thanks again for having me. I wanted to kind of say a little bit. For those listening, you can obviously see that we've experienced a lot of pressure, unnecessary pressure, due to systemic racism in our respective fields. And I think it's important for you and for everyone to empathize with our experiences and ask yourselves, what ways can you help relieve those pressures, either by offering support, making more programs as we've suggested, things like that. And for the African Americans or people of color that are watching, I encourage you to not be silent and not live these pressures by yourself. Find support, go to therapy. I'm still struggling with a lot of things that I've experienced in my life that have caused me to feel like, oh, I'm like fighting to exist. And then they're telling me, oh, well, you need to be yourself while playing music. Well, if I don't know how to be myself in life because of all these pressures and all these racist things, how can I even think about being free in music? And that's kind of what we're, you know, striving for. So I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, I highly recommend, you know, don't be afraid of therapy. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to talk about these things like we've been doing, because it's extremely important. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Dr. Lawhorn, give us a word of encouragement.
So first, thank you for having me, for inviting me, for allowing me to be a part of this. Like I can't thank you enough. The first thing is, and I wrote this down. It was things that I not went through, but one of my education courses in undergrad, because I was a music ed major, then performance. And they talked about making sure that your students see themselves in the classroom. So putting things up, or, you know, making sure that they are aware of themselves in the classroom, be it white, Black, Hispanic, anything like that. And so we've kind of lost that. I was on a call yesterday. We're talking with a lot of the students who graduated from UNCG, and one of the percussion students, he graduated years ago, and he was like, I never saw a Black percussionist playing at the highest level. And so if that means bringing in artists or bringing in clinicians or whatever it is, just so those students see what they can aspire to, that would be phenomenal. And to those Black students or students of color, Black students who are watching, and I consider myself a resource. Reach out to me if you want to get stuff off your chest. There's a lot of students that I don't necessarily have their names saved in my phone. When they send me a text or call and say, hey, oh yeah, I remember. I talk to a lot of people, and I just clearly want you to know that I'm here for you. If you need any assistance, if you want to talk about whatever, as you said, Josh Jones said, get the therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist, but I am a listening ear. And if there's anything I can do to assist, professors, if there's anything I can do to assist, just reach out to me. And if there's anything I can do, I would do my best to be there. So again, thank you for this opportunity. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Lawhorn. Dr. Moore.
Oh yeah, thank you, Teddy, for organizing this, and Joshua and Elizabeth for putting this together. I really enjoyed getting to know these artists and really getting to know some of their experiences. And I think the conversation obviously has to continue. We have to continue to speak about these things and to learn about these things so that we can grow. And I think an important thing for everybody to do is just to remember that we need to be active listeners and listen to each other, understand the perspective, so that we can start to make those changes and start to grow as a community, specifically community. But again, thank you all for everything that we talked about today, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Professor Burkhead, come on and close us out.
Thank you, Teddy and Joshua, Elizabeth, and Amber, and to the Percussive Arts Society. PAS has meant a lot to me throughout my life. It's opened up a world that I wouldn't have seen just being down here in Mississippi. And before we had the internet to give us like a really view into the world. I feel good about the leadership of PAS. I thank you so much for setting this up and the sensitivity that you guys have. I think we're off to a good start, and I really appreciate you making this happen.
Thank you. Joshua, take it away.
I'm speechless. It's been an honor to listen to everyone tonight, and I know Terri Lyne had to leave early, and to hear her words, Alana, Jillian, Latrice, Josh, Lamon, Joe, Ricky, and Teddy for your management of tonight's discussion. I've learned so much, and I will continue to, and I promise as the executive director of PAS to continue to listen and learn from my friends and my fellow members. It really is an honor, and I think that when we speak at the leadership level, we speak with the diversity in our board, we want the Percussive Arts Society, we want to be the leader. When you talk about all the other instruments and all the other arts organizations out there, or organizations around the world, we want to be the leader in this. This is important to us. And I thank you so much for, as I said earlier, continuing the conversation. This is so important to us. And so on behalf of everyone at PAS, I want to thank you. I want to thank those who have tuned in to listen. I have to thank Elizabeth de la Mater, who has now joined us there, for her support as the chair of our Diversity Alliance, and all of our Diversity Alliance members who continuously, and tonight we're talking about African-American issues, but we talk about gender issues, we talk about LGBTQA issues, we talk about socioeconomic issues, and there are so many, and the work that the Diversity Alliance is doing is amazing. And so I encourage everyone who's watching tonight to follow our Diversity Alliance on Facebook and Instagram, learn more about them on the website, and if you're not a member of PAS right now, join PAS. Join the Diversity Alliance, have your voice heard. We want it heard, we need it heard. And myself and all these amazing people here tonight who, I've got to know either throughout the last few weeks or for the last few years. We need you, we want you, and it's so important. So thank you so much for listening, for being here, and for helping make a difference. I think we're up to the right start. As everyone said, it's a beginning. But we are committed to do what we need to do to make the Percussive Arts Society the most diverse and inclusive organization of its kind anywhere in the world. So thank you for being here, and I hope everyone has a really great evening.